He was kicked out at 18. Millionaire knocks on his door with a shocking offer. Ethan Mitchell sat on the cold sidewalk of the Port Authority bus terminal in New York City, staring at the single suitcase holding all his belongings. His father, after yet another argument about his future, had given him an ultimatum that ended with him being thrown out of the house that very morning. That's when an elegant woman stopped in front of him. Her impeccable white suit and confident stride made her stand out among the bustling crowd of the terminal. She studied Ethan intently, as if searching for something familiar in his face. "You're Ethan Mitchell, aren't you? Richard's son?" she asked, her voice firm and leaving no room for evasion. Ethan looked up, surprised and wary. How did this woman know his name? And more importantly, how did she know his father? "Who are you?" he asked, instinctively tightening his grip on the suitcase strap. "My name is Victoria Reynolds, and I have an offer that could change your life," she replied, handing him a business card with the discreet logo of one of the country's top design firms. Ethan had grown up in Rochester, the only son of Richard Mitchell, owner of a small woodworking shop that barely kept the family afloat after Ethan's mother left when he was just 5. His father never spoke about her, and the few photos that existed of her were stored in boxes at the back of the closet, boxes Ethan was never allowed to open. From a young age, Ethan had shown an exceptional talent for drawing. He spent hours creating worlds in his sketchbooks, drawing faces and places that seemed to spring straight from his imagination. His father, a practical man hardened by life, saw it as a waste of time. "Drawing won't put food on the table, boy. You need to learn a real trade," Richard would say whenever he caught Ethan with a pencil in hand. The argument that led to his expulsion began when Ethan announced he wanted to apply for a scholarship to study design in New York City, instead of taking over the woodshop as his father wanted. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me," Richard had shouted, slamming the table so hard the dinnerware shook. "If you want to throw your life away with those drawings, you won't do it under my roof." And now here he was without enough money to last more than a few days in the city, holding his university acceptance letter in one hand and his suitcase in the other. He'd gotten the scholarship, but without a way to pay for housing or food, it was an impossible dream. "Why should I trust you?" Ethan asked the elegant woman still standing before him. Victoria Reynolds didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled out her phone, showed him a photo and asked, "Did you draw this?" On the screen, Ethan recognized one of his sketches he'd posted on an amateur artist forum. It was a portrait of a woman gazing out a window, her face partially obscured by the incoming light, but her eyes captured with a deep melancholy. "How did you—" he began, confused. "I've been following your work for months, Ethan. You have a rare gift, and I need someone with exactly your talent. I'm offering you a job as an assistant in my private studio, with lodging included at my estate in Greenwich." Ethan eyed her skeptically. It sounded too good to be true. What kind of millionaire businesswoman would offer a job to an 18-year-old stranger at a bus terminal? "Why me? There must be hundreds of trained artists who'd kill to work with you." Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, which carried an invisible weight. "Let's just say I recognize potential when I see it. And also," she hesitated, uncharacteristic for such a self-assured woman, "I have a debt to your family that needs settling." Before Ethan could ask more questions, Victoria handed him a card with an address and a phone number. "Think about my offer. If you accept, I'll be expecting you at this address tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'll send a car to pick you up here." She turned to leave, but stopped and looked back at Ethan. "And Ethan, you really do look so much like her." Before he could ask who he resembled, Victoria had already disappeared into the crowd, leaving Ethan alone once again with his suitcase, the card in his hand, and 1,000 questions in his head. That night, sleeping on a bench at the Port Authority bus terminal with his backpack as a pillow and his suitcase strapped to him, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the strange proposal. Who was Victoria Reynolds, and what debt could she possibly owe his family? And even more puzzling, who did he resemble? The next morning arrived with the certainty that he didn't have many options. His money would run out in a few days, and going back home would mean giving up on his dream forever, not to mention facing the humiliation of proving his father right. With his suitcase in hand, Ethan headed to the meeting point indicated on the card. Right at 10 a.m., a uniformed driver appeared and led him to a luxury car that stood out starkly against the bus terminal's surroundings. "Are you Ethan?" asked the driver, a middle-aged man with impeccable posture. "Mrs. Victoria sent me to pick you up." During the drive to Greenwich, Ethan watched out the window as the worn-out buildings of downtown gave way to the mansions that began appearing as they moved farther out. The driver, who introduced himself as George, maintained a respectful silence, speaking only when directly questioned. "Have you worked for Mrs. Victoria long?" Ethan ventured, hoping for some information. 15 years, sir," George replied, glancing briefly at him in the rearview mirror. "The Reynolds family has always been very good to me." Ethan noticed something in the driver's gaze. Was it curiosity? Surprise? He couldn't quite tell. "And what exactly does Mrs. Victoria do? I know she owns a design firm, but—" "Mrs. Victoria owns the Reynolds Design and Architecture Group, one of the largest in the country," George explained with evident pride. "She started from scratch 20 years ago and now has projects all over the United States and abroad." When the car finally stopped, Ethan was momentarily speechless. Before him stood an imposing contemporary-style mansion with clean lines and large windows that seemed to absorb the sunlight. A meticulously maintained garden surrounded the property, with modern sculptures strategically placed among the greenery. George led him to the entrance where Victoria Reynolds was waiting. Dressed in an elegant yet understated ensemble, she seemed even more commanding on her own turf. "I see you've decided to accept my proposal," she said with a faint smile. "Welcome to my home, Ethan." Victoria personally gave him a tour of the mansion, showing him the main rooms and explaining the house rules. Ethan felt completely out of place among artworks that likely cost more than everything his family had ever owned. "This will be your room," Victoria said, opening the door to a spacious room overlooking the garden. "It has a private bathroom and everything you need. If anything's missing, just ask Martha, our housekeeper." The room was larger than the living room of his house in Rochester, with a king-size bed, a desk, a top-of-the-line computer, and even an easel with professional drawing materials neatly arranged beside it. "The materials are for you," Victoria explained, noticing Ethan's gaze. "Consider it an advance for your work." "And what exactly will my work be?" Ethan asked, finally finding the courage to question her. Victoria walked to the window and stood with her back to him for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. "I'm developing a new design line inspired by personal memories and stories. Your talent for capturing emotions through your sketches is exactly what I need." She turned to face him. "You'll work directly with me in my private studio, helping to transform concepts into images." There was something more there. Ethan could feel it. Victoria wasn't telling the whole story. "And this debt you mentioned to my family," he ventured. Victoria's face hardened momentarily. "All in good time, Ethan. For today, settle in and rest. Tomorrow we'll begin work." With that, she left him, alone in the room with more questions than answers. During dinner, served in a formal dining room with a table that could easily seat 20, Ethan met Martha, the housekeeper, a woman in her 60s who watched him with a mix of curiosity and what seemed like pity. "How long have you worked for Mrs. Victoria, Martha?" Ethan asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence as he ate the best meal he'd ever tasted. "Nearly 20 years since she bought this house," Martha replied, pouring more juice. Then, lowering her voice slightly, she added, "You remind me of someone, you know?" Before Ethan could ask who, Victoria entered the room and Martha immediately resumed her professional demeanor. The moment of confidence had passed. "Tomorrow at 9 a.m. in the studio, Ethan," Victoria instructed before leaving. "It's at the end of the east hallway. Martha will show you." That night, lying in the most comfortable bed he'd ever experienced, Ethan couldn't sleep. His life had completely changed in less than 48 hours, and he still didn't understand why. Who was Victoria Reynolds, and what did she really want from him? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, continuing. The next morning, Martha led him to Victoria's studio, a spacious, bright room at the end of a long hallway. The space had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a small Zen garden, and the walls were covered in sketches, photographs, and material samples. Victoria was already there, focused on some project at the central table. Hearing the door, she looked up. "Punctual, that's good," she remarked. "Come, I want to show you what we're working on." Over the next few hours, Victoria explained the concept behind her new design line, which sought to integrate elements of personal memories into contemporary pieces. Ethan was impressed by the depth of the project and Victoria's technical expertise. "I want you to sketch this," she said, showing him an old, faded photograph of a garden with a swing. Ethan took the photo, examining it carefully. "Does this place still exist?" "No," Victoria answered, a shadow passing over her eyes. "It was demolished many years ago, but I want to recreate it in an installation." As Ethan began working, absorbed in his drawing, he didn't notice Victoria watching him intently, as if searching for something in his face, in his gestures. The following days settled into a routine. Ethan worked in the studio with Victoria, in the mornings and part of the afternoons. She was a demanding but fair mentor, giving him creative freedom while guiding him with the technical precision that showed why she was so successful. At night, Ethan explored the mansion, always with the feeling that secrets were hidden in every corner. Occasionally he'd run into Martha, who seemed willing to chat, but always became evasive when he mentioned Victoria's past or asked about the person he supposedly reminded her of. One of those nights, about 2 weeks after his arrival, Ethan was returning to his room when he heard raised voices coming from Victoria's office. Normally he would have kept walking, but the sound of his own name made him stop. "You brought Richard Mitchell's son into this house. How could you, Victoria?" said a woman's voice heavy with indignation. "My life, my decisions, mother," Victoria replied coldly. "Ethan has talent and I need him for this project." "Talent?" the voice mocked. "What will Richard think when he finds out you're sheltering his son? Have you forgotten what that man did to Sarah?" "I've never forgotten." Victoria's voice trembled slightly. "And that's exactly why Ethan is here. He deserves to know the truth." "Truth? What truth, Victoria? That your father threw Sarah out when he found out she was pregnant? That Richard chose his mediocre career over the woman he claimed to love?" Ethan felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. What were these women talking about? Who was Sarah? And what did his father have to do with it? "You don't know the whole story, mother," Victoria said, her voice now lower, almost a whisper. "No one does except me and Richard." "And what story could possibly justify bringing William Reynolds' grandson into this house without my consent?" William Reynolds' grandson. Ethan had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. Was he hearing this right? The implication of those words was too absurd to process. "Ethan is not Daddy's grandson," Victoria replied firmly. "He's my—" At that moment, a noise escaped Ethan's throat, and the voices in the office immediately fell silent. Before he could move, the door swung open, revealing Victoria and an older woman, elegantly dressed, with the same piercing eyes as Victoria's, but much harder. "It seems our young artist has a habit of eavesdropping," the older woman said disdainfully. Victoria looked pale, as if she'd seen a ghost. "Ethan," she began, but he had already turned and was running down the hall toward his room. Once inside, Ethan started throwing his few clothes back into his suitcase. His head was spinning. Somehow his life was a lie. His father, his mother, whom he barely remembered. Everything seemed connected to Victoria Reynolds in a way he didn't yet fully understand. A soft knock at the door interrupted him. "Ethan, please, we need to talk," came Victoria's voice. "Talk about what?" he replied, not opening the door. "About how you brought me here under false pretenses. About how you apparently knew my parents. About how I'm—" "What exactly, Victoria?" There was a long silence on the other side of the door. "It's not false pretenses, Ethan. I truly need your talent for this project. And yes, I knew your parents. I knew your mother, Sarah, very well." Victoria paused. "Please open the door. You deserve to know the whole truth." After a moment's hesitation, Ethan opened the door. Victoria stood alone, looking tired and vulnerable, nothing like the confident businesswoman he'd met. "I won't lie to you, Ethan," she began, stepping inside and sitting on the edge of the bed. "I knew Who you were when I approached you at the Port Authority. I've been watching your life from afar for years. Why? He asked, remaining standing, keeping his distance. Victoria took a deep breath. Because Sarah, your mother, was my best friend. We grew up together here in New York City. We were inseparable. From childhood until... She stopped as if the words were too hard. Until she met your father, Richard, during a trip to Rochester. Ethan sank into a chair, feeling his legs wouldn't hold him through what was coming. My father always said my mother left us when I was 5, that she just walked out one day and never came back. Victoria's face twisted in pain and anger. That's a lie, Ethan. Sarah would never abandon you. Victoria swallowed hard. Sarah fell ill when you were 4, an aggressive cancer. She fought for over a year, but Ethan felt tears burning his eyes. She died? He asked, his voice barely audible. Victoria nodded, her own eyes glistening. Your father couldn't handle the pressure. He brought her to New York City for treatment, but after a few months he just took you back to Rochester and cut all ties. He said he didn't want you to see your mother wasting away, that it would be better for you to believe she had left, by choice, than to carry the trauma of watching her go like that. He lied to me my whole life, murmured Ethan, his hands trembling. Why would he do that? People deal with grief in different ways, Ethan. I'm not defending what he did, but in his own twisted way, I believe he thought he was protecting you. And you? Why only show up now? Victoria stood and walked to the window, gazing at the night garden. I promised Sarah I'd look after you, that I'd make sure you had a good life, that you could develop your artistic talent. She turned to face him. But Richard wouldn't allow it. He said you were his son and that I had no right to you. In the early years, I tried. I sent gifts, letters, tried to visit, but your father always pushed me away. And then, life happened. My company grew, I got married, divorced, but I never stopped thinking about you, never stopped keeping tabs from afar. When I saw your drawings online, I knew you'd inherited Sarah's talent. A sad smile touched Victoria's lips. Your mother was an incredible artist, you know. She's the one who inspired me to pursue design. Ethan felt a wave of conflicting emotions, anger at his father for lying. All these years, grief for the mother he'd never truly known, confusion about Victoria's place in his life, and your mother, the woman you were talking to. She called me William Reynolds' grandson. Victoria sighed. My mother never accepted my friendship with Sarah. The Reynolds are a traditional family, and Sarah came from humble beginnings. When she started dating Richard, who was just a carpenter with big dreams, my mother saw it as her chance to keep her away from me. She used the family's influence to get Richard a job in Rochester, far from New York City. Far from me. But why would she call me your father's grandson? Victoria hesitated, suddenly uneasy. That's a complicated story, Ethan, one we might not be ready to tackle today. Ethan sensed there was far more beneath her words than she was willing to reveal, but he'd already been given too much to process in one night. What happens now? He finally asked. That's up to you, Victoria replied. You can take your things and leave if that's what you want, or you can stay, keep working on the project, and maybe in time we can learn more about Sarah together. I have photo albums, letters, her artwork, things you might want to see. Ethan fell silent for a long moment, weighing his options. At last, he looked up at Victoria. I'll stay, he said, but on one condition. No more secrets. I want to know everything about my mother, and what really happened between her, my father, and you. Victoria nodded slowly. Fair enough. But some truths need time, Ethan. I won't lie to you. But I ask for the space to share things when the moment is right. It was the best he could get for now, and Ethan knew it. All right, he agreed. We'll work on your project together, and in the meantime, you'll tell me about my mother. The following morning, the atmosphere in the mansion was visibly tense. Helena's mother, whom Ethan had learned was named Margaret Reynolds, made a point of showing her displeasure at his presence through icy stares and thinly veiled sharp remarks. During breakfast, served on the terrace overlooking the garden, Margaret made her first direct move. So, Ethan, does Richard know you're here? She asked with feigned casualness. Mother, Victoria warned, but Ethan raised his hand. signaling he would answer. "My father kicked me out when I announced I wanted to study design instead of taking over the carpentry business," he replied, looking directly at Margaret. "So no, he doesn't know where I am, and he probably doesn't care." "I'm surprised," Margaret said, stirring her coffee. "Richard was always so possessive of you. I remember how he almost threatened to sue Victoria when she tried to visit you years ago." Ethan turned to Victoria, who looked as if she wished the ground would swallow her. "Is that true?" Victoria shot an irritated glance at her mother before answering. "Yes, when you were about 6, I tried to visit you. I wanted to see how you were doing, maybe establish some kind of relationship. Your father didn't take it well." "What exactly happened?" Victoria sighed. "He told me that if I ever approached you again, he'd take legal action, accuse me of harassment, do whatever it took to keep me away. And you just gave up?" "I was barely in my 20s, Ethan. I was just starting my company, still financially dependent on my parents. A legal battle at that point would have ruined me." She paused. "And also, I wasn't sure if fighting for you would end up hurting you more than helping." "What about you, Mrs. Reynolds?" Ethan asked, turning to Margaret. "Why so much hostility toward me? What have I done to deserve your disdain?" Margaret seemed momentarily taken aback by the direct confrontation. Regaining her composure, she replied, "It's not about disdain, young man. It's about protecting my family. The Mitchells have already done enough damage to the Reynolds in the past." "What kind of damage?" Ethan pressed. "Mother, that's enough," Victoria interjected firmly. "Ethan isn't responsible for the choices the adults around him made. He's here at my invitation to work on an important project, and I expect him to be treated with the respect he deserves." Margaret rose from the table, placing her napkin beside her plate with studied elegance. "As you wish, Victoria. It's your house after all. I just hope you know what you're doing." With that, she left, leaving behind a heavy silence. "I'm sorry about that," Victoria said once they were alone. "My mother has always been complicated." "You don't owe me an apology," Ethan replied. "But I can't help wondering what my father could have done to make her so bitter." Victoria toyed with the sugar bowl, avoiding his gaze. "Old stories, Ethan? I'll tell you everything one day, I promise, but right now we have work to do. The project has tight deadlines." Over the following weeks, Ethan immersed himself in work with Victoria. The project was challenging and exciting, combining traditional drawing techniques with advanced digital technology to create installations that evoked memories and emotions. And as promised, Victoria began sharing small fragments of Sarah's life. She showed him photos of her teenage mother with long brown hair and a radiant smile. She told him stories of how Sarah loved watching the sunset on the beach in the Hamptons, where they vacationed together, how she was brave and determined, even though she came from a modest family. She always said art was the universal language that connected people beyond social differences, Victoria shared, showing Ethan a small sketchbook that had belonged to her mother. Ethan absorbed every detail, every story, mentally reconstructing the image of the mother he never had the chance to truly know. With each new piece of information, he felt closer to her, as if filling a void he hadn't even known existed. At the same time, new questions arose. Why did Victoria and his mother seem to blame his father so much? What had really happened between his parents? And why had Victoria, despite being so close to Sarah, waited so long to look for him? One day, while working in the studio, Ethan found a photograph fallen behind a shelf. The image showed 3 smiling young people on a beach. He recognized Victoria and his mother Sarah immediately, but the third face left him frozen. It was his father, Richard, much younger, with one arm around Sarah and the other around Victoria. The 3 looked happy, connected, with no trace of the bitterness that would define them years later. "I thought I'd lost that photo," came Victoria's voice behind him, making him jump. "You all looked so happy," Ethan remarked, handing her the photograph. Victoria gazed at the image with an expression mixing nostalgia and pain. "We were. For a while at least," she sighed. "This was taken in the Hamptons, during the summer before everything changed." "What happened?" Victoria tucked the photo into a drawer. Your father met Sarah at an arts festival in New York City, where he'd come to showcase his handmade furniture. It was love at first sight, like in the movies, she said with a sad smile. But my parents never approved. William Reynolds, my father, was a powerful, controlling man. He couldn't accept that his protégé, she made air quotes, would get involved with a simple carpenter from the countryside. Protégé? What do you mean? Sarah wasn't just my friend. She'd lost her parents in an accident when she was 15. My father, who knew her family, decided to help her, paying for her education and practically adopting her into our family. In his mind, that meant he had the right to control her future. Ethan was beginning to understand the tangled web of relationships better. And what did my father do that upset your family so much? Victoria grew visibly uncomfortable. Richard was a passionate and ambitious man, Ethan. When he saw he wouldn't get the Reynolds approval, he decided to carve his own path. He accepted a job offer in Rochester, ironically arranged by my own father to push him away. He convinced Sarah to go with him, promising to build a life together far from my family's influence. And she went, Ethan finished. Yes, she did. Against all advice, even mine, Victoria sighed. I won't lie, I was devastated when she left. We were like sisters. But I respected her choice, her love for Richard, and for a while they were happy. Then you were born and it seemed everything was going well until she got sick, Ethan said, his throat tightening. Victoria nodded. A year after the diagnosis, she was gone. And Richard, instead of letting me stay in touch with you as she had wanted, chose to cut all ties with the Reynolds. Maybe out of pride, maybe out of grief. I never knew for sure. Ethan tried to process it all. His father, who had always seemed so strong and unshakable, suddenly took on shades of vulnerability in his mind. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. Why did you look for me after all these years? Victoria hesitated, weighing her words. There's more to the story, Ethan, much more. But before I go on, there are things I need to settle, including speaking with your father. You're going to talk to my dad? Ethan nearly shouted. He made it very clear he doesn't want me in his life anymore. People say things they don't mean when they're angry, Ethan. Besides, there are things Richard needs to know. And choices he needs to make. Victoria's enigmatic expression left Ethan unsettled. What else could there be in this complicated story? That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The day's revelations swirled in his mind, mixing with memories of his childhood. He remembered how his father always changed the subject when he asked about his mother, how Sarah's name seemed forbidden in their home, how he had never met his mother's family. The next day, Victoria announced she needed to travel to Rochester for 2 days. It wasn't hard for Ethan to guess she was going to see his father. What will you tell him? He asked anxiously. The truth, Ethan. It's time for the truth to come out. She replied with a determination that brooked no argument. For the next 2 days, Ethan could barely focus on work. Victoria's absence left him at the mercy of Margaret, who never missed a chance to make sharp remarks about his presence in the house. Only Martha, the housekeeper, seemed genuinely concerned for his well-being. On the afternoon of the second day, while sketching absent-mindedly in the studio, Ethan was surprised by George, the driver. Mr. Ethan, Mrs. Victoria has just arrived and asks that you meet her in the main office, he said with a serious expression. Ethan's heart raced. What did this formal summons mean? What had Victoria discovered in Rochester? When he entered the office, he found Victoria sitting there looking exhausted but strangely calm. How did it go? He asked bluntly. Did you speak to my father? Yes, I did, Victoria replied, gesturing for him to sit. It was a difficult conversation as expected, but necessary. And he's coming to New York City. He arrives tomorrow. Ethan felt as if the ground had vanished beneath his feet. My father is coming here, to this house? Yes. There are things we need to settle, the three of us together. Victoria's expression was unreadable. She didn't seem sad or happy, just determined. What things? Victoria, I deserve to know what's happening, Ethan insisted. Victoria stood and walked to the window, something Ethan had noticed she did when she needed to gather her thoughts. Ethan, Remember when you asked me why my mother called you William Reynolds' grandson? She turned to face him. There's a reason for that one even my mother didn't fully know. Ethan waited, sensing he was about to hear something that would change his life forever. William Reynolds wasn't just Sarah's protector, Victoria continued, choosing her words carefully. He was her biological father. Ethan blinked, trying to process the information. You're saying my mother was your father's daughter, that you were half-sisters? Victoria nodded slowly. William Reynolds had a brief relationship with Sarah's mother before marrying mine. When Sarah's mother became pregnant, he was already married and refused to acknowledge her publicly. Years later, after Sarah's parents passed away, guilt led him to bring her into the family, providing education and support, but never revealing the true connection. So, Margaret. My mother never knew. She always believed my father was simply being generous with the daughter of old friends. I only learned the truth after his death, when I found letters between him and Sarah's mother. Ethan's head spun with the implications. So you and my mother were sisters, which means you're my aunt? A sad smile touched Victoria's lips. Yes, Ethan, I'm your aunt, my own flesh and blood. That's why I never completely gave up on you, even when your father did everything to keep me away. The pieces were falling into place. Victoria's inexplicable interest in him, Margaret's hostility, the recognizing glances from the older employees. And my father? Did he know about this? Not at first. Sarah never told him about her real father. It was only when she fell ill that she decided to reveal the truth to me. And Victoria hesitated. I told Richard after she passed. I thought it would convince him to let me be part of your life as your aunt. But it had the opposite effect. He was furious, accused my family of manipulating Sarah's life from the start, said he'd never let the Reynolds do the same to you. Ethan tried to picture his father, usually so reserved, in such a rage that it would make him cut every possible family tie for his son. And now? Why after all this time did you decide to reach out? And why bring my father here? Victoria took a deep breath. Because there's more to the story, Ethan, something even your father doesn't fully know. At that moment, they were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Martha. Mrs. Victoria, sorry to interrupt, but Mrs. Margaret isn't feeling well. Perhaps we should call the doctor. Victoria stood immediately. We'll continue this conversation later, Ethan, she said, following Martha in a hurry. Ethan was left alone in the office with more questions than answers. He felt like a pawn on a chessboard whose setup was completely unknown to him. Victoria was his aunt. His mother, Sarah, was the illegitimate daughter of a powerful man who never officially acknowledged her. His father had lied about his mother's departure, but maybe he'd done it to protect him from a family he saw as manipulative. And there was still more, something so significant that Victoria needed to bring father and son together to reveal it. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now continuing. The night was long and restless for Ethan. His mind buzzed with theories about what else Victoria might reveal. What secret could be so important as to bring his father to the Reynolds mansion? By sunrise, he was already awake, watching from the window as the first rays lit up the immaculate garden. He went down for breakfast, earlier than usual, only to find he wasn't the only one. Victoria was already at the table, looking as sleep-deprived as he was. How's your mother? Ethan asked, pouring himself coffee. Stable. The doctor said it was just low blood pressure, nothing serious, Victoria replied, studying him. You look tired. Hard to sleep when you find out your whole life is built on secrets and lies, he shot back, more bitterly than he'd intended. Victoria nodded in understanding. I know how you feel. When I found out about the real connection between my father and Sarah, I spent months questioning everything I thought I knew about my family. How did you find out? After my father's death, I found a safe in his office. Inside were letters, photos, even a secretly done DNA test. Victoria took a sip of coffee. William Reynolds was a man of many secrets. His affair with Sarah's mother was just one of them. And why did he never claim Sarah as his daughter? Victoria shrugged. To keep up appearances? To avoid destroying his marriage? Pure cowardice. I'll never know for sure. What I do know is that he loved her in his own twisted way, paid for her education, opened doors, left her a share of his inheritance in a fund no one in the family knew about. And my mother? Did she know he was her father? Yes, she always knew. Her mother told her as a teenager. Victoria paused. But Sarah never confronted him. She accepted things as they were. Maybe that's why she was so determined to fight for love with Richard, to build a family where love was open, honest. Ethan absorbed that information, trying to imagine what his mother's life must have been like. Growing up knowing her real father lived just a few blocks away, but she could never call him Dad. "What time is my father arriving?" he asked, changing the subject. George went to pick him up at the Port Authority bus terminal. They should be here before noon. Victoria hesitated. "Ethan, I know your relationship is strained, but try to be open. The decisions Richard made, as questionable as they may seem, were driven by love. Love for you. Love for Sarah." "Love?" Ethan scoffed bitterly. "He kicked me out," Victoria said. "I was ungrateful for not wanting to follow in his footsteps. Hurt people often hurt others, Ethan, especially those they love the most." Victoria stood from the table. "I'm going to the hospital to check on my mother. I'll be back before Richard arrives. Use this time to prepare yourself. Prepare himself. How does one prepare to face the father who rejected him under such extraordinary circumstances?" Ethan spent the next few hours in the studio, lost in his sketches, the only way he knew how to process his turbulent emotions. Around 11:30 he heard a car pulling in. His heart raced. He approached the window and watched as George opened the passenger door, revealing the familiar figure of Richard Mitchell. His father looked like he'd aged 10 years since the last time. Ethan had seen him just weeks ago. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his gait seemed heavier, as if carrying an invisible burden. Ethan stepped back from the window, not wanting to be seen. He didn't know if he was ready for this confrontation, but he knew he couldn't avoid it forever. 20 minutes later, a knock on the studio door announced Martha's arrival. "Mr. Ethan, Mrs. Victoria asks that you join her and your father in the main office," the housekeeper informed him with a sympathetic expression. Ethan took a deep breath, gathering his courage, and followed Martha through the mansion's halls to the office where his fate seemed to await. When he entered, he saw his father seated in an armchair, looking out of place and tense. Victoria stood near the window, her usual spot. At the sight of Ethan, Richard abruptly stood, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Ethan," he said, his voice hoarse, as if unused for too long. "Father," Ethan replied formally, keeping his distance. "Please, both of you, sit," Victoria intervened, gesturing to the chairs. "We have much to discuss." A heavy silence filled the room as the three settled in. Richard couldn't take his eyes off Ethan, as if afraid he might vanish at any moment. "Victoria told me she revealed the truth to you about your mother," Richard began hesitantly. "About who she really was." "You mean how she didn't abandon me but actually left because of an illness?" Ethan retorted, unable to suppress his bitterness. "Or how she was William Reynolds' daughter, making Victoria my aunt?" Richard closed his eyes briefly, as if each word were a physical blow. "I deserved that," he murmured. "I lied to you, Ethan. And there's no excuse in the world good enough to justify what I did." "Why, Dad?" Ethan asked, feeling his anger give way to sorrow. "Why lie about something as important as my own mother?" Richard glanced at Victoria as if seeking support, before turning back to his son. "When your mother fell ill, it felt like my whole world collapsed," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I tried to be strong, for her, for you. I brought her to New York City to the best treatments, but..." His voice faltered. "When the doctors said there was nothing more they could do, something inside me broke. I couldn't accept it. I couldn't imagine life without her." Ethan felt tears welling up, but held them back. "That still doesn't explain why you lied to me. Why you made me believe she abandoned us." "Because I'm a coward, Ethan," admitted Richard, tears now streaming freely down his aged face. Because I couldn't bear the thought of having to explain to you, a 5-year-old child, what death is, what it means to lose someone we love. Because every time you asked about her, it was like reliving the pain of that loss. So one day, when you asked for the 100th time where your mother was, I told you she had left, that she had gone by choice. And you thought that would be less painful for me, growing up believing my own mother didn't love me enough to stay. Richard shook his head, devastated. At the time, it seemed easier. For me, not for you. I realized that too late. When I saw the effect that lie had on you, it was already too late to take it back. How could I explain I'd been lying all those years? Ethan looked at Victoria, who watched the scene with silent tears. And what about you? Why did you keep me from her? He asked Richard, pointing at Victoria. Why deny me the right to know my mother's family? Richard stiffened slightly. That's more complicated, he replied, glancing at Victoria. When Sarah passed and Victoria told me the truth about William being her father, I was furious. Not at Sarah, or even at Victoria, but at the Reynolds family as a whole. They had manipulated Sarah's life from the start. William used her as his charity project to ease his conscience, while Margaret treated her like an intruder. I decided I wouldn't let them do the same to you. It wasn't your decision to make alone, Victoria interjected. Sarah wanted me to be part of Ethan's life. It was her last request to me. I know, Richard admitted, shame clear in his voice, and I disrespected that. Out of anger, pride, fear of losing my son to the wealthy family who could give him everything I couldn't. Ethan struggled to process the revelations, years of resentment giving way to reluctant understanding of the human weaknesses that had shaped his fate. So is that it? He finally asked. You brought me here to tell me these truths about the past? Victoria and Richard exchanged a meaningful glance. No, Ethan, Victoria replied, her tone suddenly graver. There's still something you need to know. Something even your father didn't know until 2 days ago. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. What else could there be? Victoria stood and walked to a drawer in her office, pulling out a folder. When Sarah learned her diagnosis, she did something without telling anyone, not even Richard or me. She opened the folder, revealing medical documents. She froze her eggs, Ethan, as a way to preserve some part of herself for the future. She left specific instructions that they should only be revealed to you when you turned 18. Ethan felt dizzy at the revelation. And why am I only hearing about this now? Victoria shot an accusing look at Richard, who lowered his head. Because I intercepted the lab's letter that arrived on your 18th birthday, Richard confessed. I read it and destroyed it. I decided it was better you didn't know, that it would only reopen old wounds. How could you? Ethan stood up, furious. It was my right to know. I know, son, and there isn't a day I don't regret it, Richard said, utterly defeated. When Victoria showed up in Rochester and confronted me with all this, I realized how wrong I'd been, how much I'd denied you. Victoria continued gently. Your mother's genetic material is still preserved, Ethan, and with it, she left a letter for you and a request for me. She wanted me to help you fulfill the dream she never could, pursuing a career in the arts. And the project we're developing together, Ethan began to understand. It's inspired by the sketches and concepts your mother left behind, Victoria finished. Sarah was too talented to be forgotten. This project is my way of honoring her memory, of sharing her talent with the world, and of keeping my promise to her. Ethan felt the tears finally overflow. His entire life had been built on lies, but behind them was the deep love of a mother he had never truly known, a mother who, even knowing she would leave, had planned their way to stay connected to him, to give him a future. I don't know what to say, he murmured, overwhelmed by emotion. You don't have to say anything right now, Victoria replied, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. Just know that you have choices, Ethan. Choices your mother never had. And whatever you decide to do with this information, I'll be here to support you. As your aunt, as your mother's friend, as someone who cares deeply about you. Richard stood up, hesitantly stepping closer to his son. Me too, Ethan, he said, his voice choked. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I failed you deeply. But if you give me the chance, I'd like to try to make things right, to be the father you deserve." Ethan looked at the broken man before him, the father who had always been an unshakable figure of authority in his life. For the first time, he saw not the man who had kicked him out for not following his plans, but a man who had lost the love of his life and, fearing he might lose his son too, had made desperate mistakes. "This will take time," Ethan finally said. "I can't promise I'll forgive everything at once." "I understand," Richard replied, nodding. "I'll wait as long as it takes." Victoria, watching the scene, seemed to make a decision. "I have a proposal," she said. "Richard, you have valuable experience as a craftsman, and we're currently working on a project that combines conceptual art with handmade production. Why don't you stay in New York City for a while and work with us?" The proposal surprised both father and son. "You're offering me a job?" Richard asked, incredulous. "I'm offering you and Ethan a chance to reconnect while honoring Sarah's legacy," Victoria corrected. "That is, of course, if you both agree." Ethan considered the proposal. Working side by side with the father who had rejected his talent for years seemed ironic, but it also represented a chance for rebuilding, for healing. "I'm okay with it," he finally said. "If my father is willing." Richard looked at his son with renewed hope in his eyes. "I'm willing to try," he replied. "For you, for Sarah, for all of us." That night, alone in his room, Ethan opened the letter Victoria had given him. The envelope, yellowed with time, held the delicate handwriting of a woman he didn't remember, but whose blood ran through his veins. "My dear Ethan," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means you're already a man, and I wasn't there to watch you grow. There are no words to express how much that saddens me, but I know you're strong like your father, and sensitive as I hope you've inherited from me. I leave you not just my eternal love, but also the chance to carry on my legacy, if you choose to. Victoria will explain everything when the time is right. Always remember, art isn't just a form of expression, it's a way of life. It's how we keep the people we love alive, how we tell our stories to the future. Wherever you go, whatever you decide to do, know that I'm proud of you, my son. And that, in some way, I'll keep living through your heart, your eyes, and your hands that create. With all my love, Mom." Ethan read and reread the letter several times, tears flowing freely. For the first time in his life, he felt truly connected to the mother he had lost so early. Through those words, Sarah became real to him, no longer just a hazy figure in his childhood memories, or the woman he had believed abandoned him for so long. In the months that followed, the Reynolds mansion witnessed a remarkable transformation. The project Sarah's Memories, as it was named, came to life through the unexpected collaboration between Victoria, Ethan, and Richard. Ethan's artistic talent, combined with Richard's craftsmanship and Victoria's business vision, created something truly unique. Even Margaret, initially resistant to the Mitchells' presence in her life, began to lower her defenses as she saw how the project somehow revived Sarah's presence, a woman she had secretly learned to admire despite her lingering resentment. On a sunny afternoon, as father and son worked side by side in the studio, Richard looked at Ethan with a wistful smile. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he said, "of the man you've become, the artist you are." Ethan, who now knew and understood so much more about his parents, nodded. "I think she'd be proud of both of us, Dad, for being here together after everything." Victoria, watching from the doorway, felt she had finally fulfilled her promise to the friend and sister she had lost so long ago. The family Sarah had loved so dearly was reunited, imperfect, scarred, but finally honest and at peace. Sarah's Memories would debut at a prestigious New York City gallery in the coming weeks, introducing the world to the talent of a woman gone too soon and a son who, against all odds, carried on her legacy. And in that Greenwich mansion, three people bound by their love for a fourth finally found truth, reconciliation, and a new beginning. Because, as Sarah had written, art wasn't just a form of expression, it was a way to keep the people we love alive, to tell our stories to the future. The end, dear listener. Your tears speak louder than words. Share what this family journey stirred in you, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories. Your company is our greatest gift.